a little bit of progress on the Riley tonight. I should get a lot of time to work on this because we're in New Zealand, we're back in lockdown again, which I don't mind. I quite enjoy it, to be honest, so I'm quite happy stuck at home. The few bits and pieces arrived today. So the first thing was my 1/4 inch reamer, so I was able to ream out the holes in the chassis rails so that the pins all fit through. And the other thing I bought recently, after realizing in one of my last films I mentioned I don't have an easy way to measure angles, I got this, it's only a cheap one, digital protractor ruler thing, and that was accurate enough for me to be able to measure the angle on the chassis rails here, which I'd guessed it was between 7 and 8 degrees. It turns out it is 8 degrees. So knowing that, I was able to 3D print a little spacer block. Obviously I'm going to machine these out of steel when I get some steel, but that was just to check the angle was correct and a good guess at the spacing, because I need to know how thick to make them. And that was kind of a rough guess. So the idea was always do a rough guess, put the torque tube and the rear axle casing back on the car and bolt it onto the springs, because that's how the car's going to be in actual use. And then all I need to do to make sure the springs are parallel is measure between the shackles from here to here, and then make sure I've got the same measurement from there to there. And it's interesting, there's actually a little bit of twist on the top levers of the springs, which is why I've got a clamp there holding it. It doesn't hold itself in place very well. I've actually discovered that before on the MGB, changing the rear springs on that. You have to kind of twist them into position a little bit, and then once they're in position, they're fine, they move as they should. But the springs themselves aren't perfectly flat or aligned. But the clamp there holding it, what I was able to do is then measure the distance from between the two front shackles, and I was able to figure out, well, I know what the thickness of that spacer is on the center line. It's actually 14 millimeters, and it turns out that was pretty much twice the width that I needed. So I now know if I make two spacers that are 7 mil thick in the middle, that should align the rear springs perfectly. So I'll 3D print a couple of rough ones of those and give them a try on the car and see if that is correct. But with everything bolted together like this, everything seems to move okay. Everything seems in alignment. I really need to measure diagonally across the car and front to back and just check everything is accurate. But it should be fine. There's not really any way it couldn't be. The only other thing I may need to do is I have left quite a lot of material on the back of these pins, and it doesn't really need to be that long, so I might set these up in the lathe again and just turn them down shorter so I can use a shorter spacer in the back there. The other thing is I may look at, once I've made the circular spacers that go under there, getting the pin welded to the spacer. So then the spacer is bolted to the chassis rail. There's 4 bolts that hold it, but it'll also be held by the nut on this side, so there's no way that can come loose. I believe the original pieces were cast as a single piece, so this is a good compromise. But that's looking pretty good, I think. So tonight I'll see if I can print those extra spacers and just recheck the axle fitting, turn down the pins, and then I can probably almost consider that done once I've actually made those spacers. I just need to get the steel to do that. One other thing I've sorted out now after having a nice chat to my friend in the club who reconditioned the oil pump for me is how these eccentric arms go and what holds them in place. And basically it's the fact that they go back to back like this, and you can see how the plungers, each one has a pin that engages in the eccentric rod, and one has the pin going down, the other one has the pin facing up, and the two eccentrics sort of rub on top of each other. You have to remember this is all covered in oil, I guess, when the engine's running, so that's what kind of holds it in place down the bottom here. It just can't go anywhere. So you can see this kind of rotates like that. At the moment, of course, the oil pump isn't bolted down, so once that's bolted down, this will all become a lot more secure. This eccentric is just driven by that pin on the intermediate gear. This should really be a tighter fit, I think, on this collar, but some bearing fit should take care of that when I actually go to assemble everything. But you can see, because the oil pump isn't bolted in, it's moving around a little bit, but that should be how those work. So that's another small mystery solved. There's also a quite a large gasket that goes in here, so that sort of big 1/4 inch gap looked wrong to me to start with, but apparently no, that is exactly how it's supposed to be. There's also a paper gasket that goes underneath there, which is easy enough to make. You just have to make sure there's a little tiny hole at the top of the oil pump. You have to make sure you don't cover that. So I had just yesterday spoken to a local engine balancer who I was going to go around and see probably Thursday or Friday, but like I say, we're in lockdown again now, so that'll have to wait until the lockdown's lifted. But I'm going to go and see them about having the clutch and flywheel and crankshaft all balanced. I went ahead and shortened down the pins and recut the threads on the end now that I know exactly how long they need to be. So that's another job done. I'll reprint the test spacer tomorrow. I'll print 4 of them, and then I can properly make sure everything's going to line up, and then sort out getting some steel so I can machine up the proper ones. Today after work well, actually this morning I started a print so I could leave it going during the day off the little tapered spacers, and then after I finished work I came and took them off the printer and tested them out on the pins, and they seem to work pretty well. So I know now what size I need. The middle ones need to be slightly thicker, or else I need quite deep washers, because when I rethreaded the ends of the pins, I didn't thread far enough down, so I need a little washer just to take up the slack between the end of the thread and the little spacer. But with those in place, everything seems to be fitting quite nicely, and the it's a bit hard because I can't really balance, but if I jump up and down on the back, the springs all seem to move. I really need to get the front axles up on stands as well, so that the whole car is actually sitting on its springs effectively, and then I can see what it's really going to be like. But that fitted reasonably well, and it wasn't too hard to get the springs and everything in place. So now I know those are the correct size, I will sort out getting some suitable steel and make up proper ones of those. The other thing I've done today, since it's been a reasonably sunny day, is given the brake drums another coat of paint. Then I think the welding rods have arrived, so I need to play around with the TIG welder and get an idea of how the TIG brazing works so I can repair the cracks in the head here. It seems to be only these rear bridges that have cracked because they're quite narrow. There's quite a bit of material on these other ones, so they seem okay. I'll have to find, I guess I can either practice on this head because I'm not going to be using it, and I can practice on a place that I can easily clean up, or I'll look around and see if I've got, I think I've got another head in even worse condition than this one that's obviously just been sitting outside and is probably unusable. So I'll find something to practice on first before I actually attack my good one with the welder.